Hello, and welcome back to the Simplifiers podcast, where we take topics in work and in life and simplify them. And friends, we've been talking a lot about leadership and culture strategy lately, really simplifying that down in the workplace. And I want to take it in a slightly different direction today. Let's talk about leadership, more specifically, purpose-filled leadership, and how that is very different from, my goodness, what we have experienced for decades that has been profit-driven leadership. How do we thrive as a purpose-filled leader in this day and age? And well, post-pandemic, postmodern, what does that mean? And talking about how fragile the future really is. So my special guest today is author Dr. John Blakey. He's the UK's leading CEO executive coach, former FTSE 100 managing director, and a globally recognized thought leader on trust and purpose-driven leadership. He's the author of 3 award-winning books, Force for Good, The Trusted Executive, and Challenging Coaching. His insights on leadership, trust, and purpose-driven leadership have been featured in Forbes, BBC News, HuffPost, The Sunday Times, and international podcasts. So I'd like to welcome to the Simplifiers podcast, Dr. John Blakey. Hi, John. How are you?
Hi, Mary. Yeah, I'm great. I'm really looking forward to engaging with your audience today on this important topic.
I'm super thrilled to chat with you as well. And, I've been reading through your most recent book, Force for Good, which we're going to talk a lot about. What does that mean? But first, why does being, so focused on purpose matter so much for today's leaders, in your opinion? And how does it link to trust and performance? What's your take on that?
Yeah, why does purpose matter so much today? Well, when the room gets darker, it's an opportunity for your own light to shine brighter. And the room is getting a little bit darker, some would say, at the present times around purpose. So I think it's important for people who are motivated to stand for purpose to see this as an opportunity rather than as a threat. And the opportunity is shine brighter, bring hope, inspire others, because a lot of people at the moment are maybe losing that hope and losing that inspiration.
And I think hope is so incredibly important and so over commercialized right now. You can go to your favorite grocery store or department store and buy tumblers and T-shirts with the word hope and some catchy little phrase on it. And I feel like it really does, when you simplify down, it is what people need the most. And in your book, you talk about a future fragile world. What does that mean?
Yeah, future fragile. I grew up in a world where the default setting was optimism, that the future will always be better than the past. Technology and science and education would lead us to some utopian future. And enough of us believed that we were confident about the future. Not everybody, but I say the default setting. I think the default setting now is that a lot of people don't believe that the future is going to be better than the past. In fact, I have a statistic that backs this up that I came across recently from the Edelman Trust Barometer. In the UK, only 17% of parents think that their children are going to have a better life than they've had. So I think that's a pretty worrying statistic. But it's also backed up by my experience of working with leaders that the future, in many people's eyes, is fragile, and therefore hope, which is something that we've often taken for granted, is something now that I think we need to be more deliberate about, and we need as leaders to pump hope into the system. And in a way that maybe in the past we didn't need to feel that was our responsibility. But I think now it's very much part of the purpose-driven leader's role is to be a beacon of hope.
Yeah, and I want to go deeper on that because, like I said earlier, I think hope sort of gets spun around as corporate jargon, or something cute on a coaster on your table, but it really is the truth of what people need the most right now to feel safety, security, and more. I know in your book you talk a lot about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and so I want to talk about. Specifically, how could executives and senior leaders start to uncover and articulate their own leadership purpose to help, again, be that beacon of hope for others?
Yeah, you mentioned Maslow's hierarchy, and I think it's a model that many of us are familiar with. The idea that we progress through different levels of motivation and drivers in our lives and in our careers, and that initially we're focused on those basic physiological needs, putting food on the table, having a roof over our head, and then we move to more of those psychological needs of self-esteem, achievement, a sense of belonging. But Maslow's hierarchy is intriguing because a lot of people think that it only has 5 levels, and that the peak of that is level 5 of self-actualization, achieving your potential. Actually, Maslow had a 6th level in his hierarchy, which he called intrinsic values. He didn't talk about it a great deal in his work because he thought it was too spiritual. But he has this 6th level that he said that there is a growing tip in the population. He estimated it as 1% of the population are motivated by their intrinsic values. So I think this hierarchy gives us a good language to talk about the transition from a life of success to a life of significance. And I think that a lot of us are caught up in the life of success, but sometimes we lose hope in that, and we need a new fuel to motivate us to get to that higher ground. And I think Maslow's hierarchy, in particular this level 6, do we want to be part of that growing tip? Do we want to be people who wake up on a Monday morning and are motivated by our intrinsic values? Because I think if we can reach for that, we will become beacons of hope for other people, because that's purpose-driven leadership. Our values are the gateway into our purpose. And to work with people like that who are focused on that level of motivation, I think is hugely inspiring.
Yes, and that ripples out, right? So that directly affects the people that are direct reports to them, or say the board, which you would hope, if it's a positive intrinsic value, it will ripple out upwards and downwards and sideways in your organizational hierarchy chart, right?
Yeah, and our values are many and different. So I think there's a diversity about this idea as well, that my values will be different to your values. My way of being a force for good is going to be different to your way of being a force for good, because my premise is that when you honor your values, you will become a force for good. You will live that purpose-driven life, but it will be a different expression of that than somebody else. And there's room for all sorts of manifestations of that force for good, depending upon values that could range from courage to kindness, to authenticity, to fairness, to justice. All of these words can generate different purposes and different expressions of being a force for good.
Yeah, and you break it down, and I really love this simplified 3 dimensions of up, in, and out, to help that leader really define what those intrinsic values are to you. Because a lot of times you can go, well, yeah, joy is important, courage is important, integrity is important, honesty is important. It's all important, right? Which you're not very clear on really what are those things that drive you the most. So break it down. Tell us what up, in, and out means, and how can we start to use that framework?
Yeah, so in the book Force for Good, I have this 3 dimensions of purpose-driven leadership, and if you master those 3 dimensions, I think that's when you are thriving in that purpose-driven role. So I talk about the up, the in, and the out. The up is that upper purpose. How do you identify your purpose? How do you stay connected with it through the rough and tumble of daily life? And how do you feel the joy of that purpose? Because for some people, the joy becomes a burden. The purpose becomes a burden, and we want to keep it as a source of joy. So that's that upper purpose. And then the in is the inner resources. If you're going to run the purpose-driven path, how are you going to sustain your energy and motivation and resilience to make sure that you finish the race? People who pursue purpose can sometimes be tempted to self-sacrifice on behalf of that purpose. But of course, that doesn't really serve the purpose if you're not staying in your resourceful self over the full journey. And then finally, the out refers to the outward followership. How do you make sure that when you look over your shoulder, the right talent is following you down that purpose-driven path. Because sometimes leaders get so passionate about the purpose and go so fast down that path that they forget to take the right people with them on that journey. So the up, the in and out is a simple language to think about, where might I be thriving at the moment? Where might I be under pressure? And therefore, can I diagnose where the risks might be for me on that purpose-driven path? And then obviously in the book, I go on to talk about how you might tackle those risks if you're particularly feeling that you're challenged in a certain area.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that sometimes even the very best leaders, their compass gets a bit foggy, and it's hard to remember, why are we driving so hard? Why are we focused on this priority? Why are we headed down this path? And I think it's really important to come back and, simplify and recalibrate. I really liked in your book, I'm looking at page 11 right now, the 3 questions you have to ask yourself as a leader when it comes to up, in, and out. I feel like this really, really simplifies it down. Up is, how do I discover, connect with, serve, and feel the joy of my higher calling? I mean, this is definitely a journaling moment. In, how do I manage my motivation, resilience, and spiritual well-being while pursuing my higher calling? And then out, how do I lead my followers by forgiving the individual, protecting the team and purpose, and becoming a beacon of hope? Can you tell me more about what you meant there about forgiving the individual? What does that mean?
Yeah, it's not a word that you come across in many leadership competency frameworks.
But it should be. Oh my gosh.
It should be, Mary. It should be. Particularly in this day and age, because we live in a time of great diversity, of many different views, many different ways to get from A to B. And a leader will be working with individuals who look at the world quite different from themselves and are at different stages of their own journey, and they will make mistakes. And I think the forgiveness that I'm talking about is to be able to put into context an individual mistake in relation to the purpose and the mission that you're focused on, and that asking that question, will this matter in 5 years' time? Will this particular incident actually matter? Is this a hill to die on? And I think a lot of leaders have been brought up to be very brutal, really, in terms of tackling issues, solving problems, fixing things. But I've seen a lot of leaders wear themselves out with that by getting dragged into disputes, conflict, disagreements over what really to a lot of people would look now as being relatively minor issues, but where emotions got stirred. And so this forgiveness that I'm talking about is to be very discerning about letting things go. Some things can be let go and are better let go of, because everything takes energy and you've only got so much amount of energy. And if you let go of more, you can take hold of that purpose more strongly and make sure that you're directing your scarce energy to things that really matter. And I talk about protect the team, protect the purpose. Those are the things that do matter. Those are the lines that you want to be conscious of and protecting. But there's a lot of things that you can let go of. And if you let go of them, you'll feel lighter, you'll have a more productive workplace. And I believe that a lot of us need to learn more about that forgiveness and that letting go.
Yeah. And, I can think back on many times where I've been caught up in some sort of emotional whirlwind or political drama inside an organization. You're like, God, it's just such a waste of energy. And also it drops us right straight down to the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, to safety and security. In the more toxic cultures I've been able to witness, and it's a lot of finger pointing. Well, it's that person over there, or that team that didn't share information, or this person who, caused the downfall, or we didn't hit our revenue targets, or blah, 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 blah. And so I feel like, tell me if I'm wrong, when you shift over to being a purpose-driven leader, you don't play in those games. You don't participate in that way. But how do you bring others along who are used to that corporate mentality of finger pointing and shoving blame onto others? I mean, you could forgive all day, but if you still have to work with that person, woof, it's real tricky.
Yeah, it's hard. And one of the phrases I use in the book, Mary, is it's better to suffer than to retaliate.
Yeah.
And I think if you want to get into the game of forgiveness, and if you want to see that as part of purpose-driven leadership, it's hard. You will have a sleepless night. You will be wanting to do something and having to sort of hold yourself back. But in my experience, it passes. It passes. And if you're willing to sort of do that suffering, it passes. It goes. It gets overtaken by events. And the more you go around that cycle of letting go of things that don't really matter, the quicker it passes. You're building a different muscle. And I think in the world we live in, where there's so much drama, it's very helpful to be able to step out of that, and to know how to do that, and to know over time to build the self-protection such that you're not getting pulled into that on a daily basis.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about some practical tips. So what are practical ways that leaders could translate purpose into daily decision-making and behavior so they can truly be that force of good? Give me a couple of ideas here.
Yeah, if we're thinking about the up, I'll give you an idea from the up of purpose-driven leadership, maybe one from the in of purpose-driven leadership. So in terms of the up, how do you stay connected with your purpose? Because a lot of leaders, I know what their purpose is, but then they get distracted into other more pressing issues, and slowly they lose connection with that true north. One of the exercises that I do, and several of my clients do, is that once a week on a Sunday evening, it takes me about 10 minutes, but I open a note on my app, and at the top of this note is titled, How I Honored My Values This Week. And then I have a list of 7 values. So my 7 values that have stood me in good stead for the last sort of 15 years. And I look at those values, and I look at my diary for the coming week, and I start to map my diary to my values. And I ask myself, where is my value of courage going to be honored this week? Where is my value of sharing going to be honored this week? I'm doing this podcast right now with you, Mary, and my value of sharing is being honored by doing this. So when I saw this podcast in my diary this week, I'm thinking, tick, there's an activity. So I'm consciously converting my purpose into my values and then making it practical by looking at my diary. And I've done that for 15 years. And if you do that for 15 years, if you follow that habit for 15 years, it changes how your diary looks.
Yeah.
Because you're making different decisions, and you start to become more and more aware of things that do honor your values and things that don't. And I think that's super, super helpful. And a lot of my clients have found that a really powerful exercise to do.
I love that. And I mean, again, it comes back to your point of building that muscle, recalibrating. You're not setting the compass once and then putting it in your rucksack. Like you're actually watching it, looking at it, checking throughout the week that you're still on target to what you believe is true for you. That helps guide all your decisions. Going back to the book at page 33, I love this. This was so practical and simple. And I just feel like this is so important to share. Of just like, say you've got meetings that are just starting to go off the rails, and you need another framework to help get the team back on track and stay on purpose. You say this: the process starts with gathering with a spirit of openness and personal connection that breaks the ice in the cold virtual world. You guys also give roles to the meeting attendees like treasure hunter, values guardian, and timekeeper. So one person who's the treasure hunter looks for nuggets of wisdom from the meeting and plays them back to everybody at the end of the session. The values guardian looks for examples of where the team has honored its values or not and feeds this back to the team. Both roles can be fun and foster greater connection. Even the timekeeper role can spark humor as the lucky incumbent looks to keep the agenda on track by creatively alerting attendees that time is up. I really like this idea of a values guardian. I've never heard of that before. But I mean, turn it into a bit of a game, and flip the brainstorm meetings, the weekly team updates on its head a bit and say, gosh, are we really doing what we say we're going to do and the values that we've set? I love that.
Yeah, and it works, Mary. I ran a workshop last week, and we had our treasure hunter, we had our values guardian, and at the end of the meeting, the treasure hunter played back the little nuggets that they'd spotted in the meeting, and the values guardian gave us 3 values where they felt they'd seen us honor those values as a team, and 1 value where they felt that we could step up a bit. And as long as you give permission for people to play these roles and everybody's understanding why, it's a lot of fun, but it also contributes a really constructive, positive energy particularly to a virtual meeting, because we all know that it's harder to build this trust in the virtual world. But you can bring these techniques and tools, and they do make a difference.
Yeah. I think a couple more pieces on that. I think, yes, it gamifies. B, it brings you together. There's a sense of community and belonging in that. And C, it gives a role to people who are maybe the quieter ones in the room, an opportunity to be a voice that is heard and seen and acknowledged. Because let's face it, sometimes the quietest people in a meeting are the smartest. They are watching and observing things that others maybe don't know and see. So I love the concept of a treasure hunter as well.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. So being a force for good, it's obviously the title of your book. Do I have to work at a nonprofit or a charity to do this, or can I still work at a for-profit global corporate entity?
Well, it's a great question. Part of the inspiration for the title Force for Good comes from the mission of a community called B Corp. So B Corp is a community of for-profit organizations that have been accredited as being a force for good in the world. And the strapline of the B Corp movement is making business a force for good. So these are for-profit companies who believe that they can honor their values, be purposeful, make a positive impact in the wider society, and that will also enhance their commercial performance. So it's turning some of our traditional beliefs on the head. Sometimes we have this idea that it's either profit or purpose.
Right.
But these organizations are saying, no, we think that we can do both. And I certainly worked with a lot of B Corp leaders and for-profit leaders who are also a force for good. So I think that we don't need to have such hard and fast distinction between the third sector, the public sector, the private sector, as we used to have. I think purpose can show up in all of those sectors in different ways. And I think that's an exciting opportunity for for-profit leaders to think creatively about how they can do both.
And you made a really valid point in the book. I mean, the times of business have changed significantly, really, in the last 5 years. You call it postmodern, post-pandemic, and we've already talked about future fragile. What does it mean to be a postmodern business? How do you use that framework?
Yeah, postmodern. It's a word that isn't used a lot in business, but I think it helps us understand the modern workplace, because postmodern is this idea that belief in a single way of doing things, a single truth, a single absolute right and wrong, has fallen away in the last 25, 30 years. Yeah. And it's linked a little bit to what I was saying earlier, that the diversity of worldviews that are being brought to the modern workplace is so much greater than used to be the case. And therefore the leader has to navigate through that and build relationships across those divides that could actually become areas of dispute or areas of disagreement or potentially aspects that create a more toxic culture. So I think that there is an awareness and a subtlety that leaders need to bring to that these days that in the past wasn't required.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like this is the through line in the series we're doing this fall is, when you really double down and focus on your intrinsic values, you really focus and get clear on your purpose as a leader and as an organization, then you really are moving in a different element besides profit and shareholders. And I think that major corporations have been working in that realm for so long that what happens is multiple rounds of layoffs decimates the culture at your company. And I've literally seen leaders witness them say, well, we can just get more talent, more people. We'll find the right people to fill the holes. But the truth of the matter is that sustainable when we actually do invest in better employee experience because it's rooted in our purpose and in our values? It translates into better customer experience, and it is the win-win-win for profitability. The formula is right there in front of us. But the way that companies and leaders have been trying to go after profit at all costs, culture is decimated. I just don't think it's sustainable anymore. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a time when we need to know where we stand, and we need to make choices as leaders. And there are different views about what makes for good business. You will get some people that say, oh, it's a time that we need to double down on profit, and the scope of business's role in the world is simply to generate wealth. And then there are other people who say, no, I think business could aspire to be more than that. And I'm in that camp. I think business is too influential to limit itself to just playing in that world of profit. Because in Maslow's hierarchy, that's that level of self-esteem and success and achievement. But in the same way that individuals want to progress through that hierarchy, I think businesses also need to continue to progress and evolve, and the business landscape to evolve. I think B Corp is a really interesting example of these businesses that want to evolve to the next level and look at doing both profit and purpose. And I think we'll find that that's a more sustainable model. But it's a time when we have to prove it. One of the difficulties is that a lot of this is a theory. I love working with leaders who can take the theory and actually make it work, where they're developing organizations that are commercially successful, where their employees love coming to work, and where they can show positive impact on the wider community or sustainability and other agendas. We need more leaders to convert the theory into practice so that we can prove that this is a better way.
Yeah, for sure. So, as we know, in this day and age, there is a lot of uncertainty. There are a lot of times where you're feeling the pressure of insane revenue targets or, massive change. How do you sustain your purpose during those times of upheaval? I know you've got a tool called the Thrival Kit. So tell me more.
Yeah, the Thrival Kit that I put in the book, it's a play on words. We're very used to survival kits. So I thought, why don't we have a Thrival Kit? We're trying to thrive, so we need a Thrival Kit. And I've got 19 exercises in that Thrival Kit, each of which are linked to either the up, the in, or the out of purpose-driven leadership. And these are daily, weekly, monthly habits. So how do we go from the theory of purpose to the practice of purpose? It's through habits. And I love that phrase about first we make our habits, then our habits make us. And so I'm very keen on building these daily, weekly, monthly routines with my clients. I shared a weekly routine about how I honored my values. So that's one habit. There's a daily routine that I talk about in the book, what is the first thing you do in the morning? What is the last thing you do at night before you go to sleep? Because psychologically, you're telling yourself something is important if it's the first thing you do in the morning and if it's the last thing you do at night. So, for example, the last thing I do at night is a gratitude journal. And in that gratitude journal, I will talk about my purpose. So the last thing I do, the last thing that's in my consciousness before I go to sleep is purpose. Yeah. So that's a daily habit. I also have a monthly habit in the book that's related to the inner purpose-driven leadership, which I call radiators and drains. And it's an exercise that I learned from working with the Team GB Olympic rowing team. because they, every quarter they did this, they used to get together as a team and they'd have a flip chart in the room and they'd put a word at the top of one flip chart, which was radiators, and a word at the top of the other chart was drains. And a radiator was any person, place, role, activity that generated energy. And a drain was any person, place, role, activity that drained energy. And they used to list those together, and then they would ask the question, how do we maximize the radiators and minimize the drains? And it's an exercise that I do, and again, a lot of my clients use that as a simple way of boosting energy and taking care of that motivation and resilience. Can take you maybe 15 minutes to do that, but the potential impact of that in terms of making good decisions about your inner resources is massive.
It's incredibly important because I think, so many times leaders are caught in the hamster wheel of busyness and going from one fire to another, and you just, feel like you're constantly spinning plates and constantly having to make very quick decisions. That the actual metaphor of stopping, getting off the hamster wheel and reflecting, journaling, walking, talking to an executive coach, really getting that outside perspective and pausing and reflecting on where you're at and what's going well and what's not going well helps you make better decisions in the split second moments, right?
Yeah, and you just reminded me about that phrase of spending time on your business rather than in your business. So it's, again, this is about spending time on your leadership rather than in your leadership. How much time are we really spending on it? And I think daily, weekly, monthly, we should be spending time on our leadership rather than in our leadership.
For sure. So to round it off, what's one story or maybe an example of a leader that's thriving that you've maybe come in contact with because they've stayed grounded in their purpose?
Yeah, I was thinking about this before we talked, Mary, and I'm currently working with a female leader, vice president in a major multinational company. And this leader, when I met her, was at a crossroads in her career. She'd been very successful, but she said that her motivation had been driven by proving other people wrong. And in that Maslow's hierarchy, that motivation had got her to a certain level of achievement. But she said, I don't think it's going to work anymore. I need a new fuel. And that for me was that sign about I need a purpose-driven fuel. And she was at a crossroads about whether she wanted to carry on the path that she's on. She actually used a phrase with me, I'm on a path and I'm not sure how I got here, and I'm not sure if it's what I want to do. And so as a coach, I've been working with her with that values, with her list of values, and with the exercises in the book to help her find this purpose-driven fuel and therefore to make a choice about her next steps. And a very brave leader who is doing that work fearlessly. And I'm seeing, just fantastic progress and confidence and clarity that's emerging as she's working with these exercises. And it's just great to see a leader working so hard on these questions. I mean, I'm passionate about it, as you can tell, but it's great when you meet clients who are at the coalface of corporate leadership, who are actually doing this work, and you just know how much difference it's going to make to them, but also to the people that they're leading, and for me, that's why I do what I do.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, culture also starts with you, the individual. So if you are hard, pounding the pavement, going 80 billion miles an hour in your job and you resent it, you hate it, then what's the point, really? What's the point in, really being caught up in that hamster wheel of doom and gloom when you really could pause, get back to basics, focus on your intrinsic values, and start to figure out where there are places you can make change for positive, whether it's changing systems and processes around you with your direct reports or influencing the board to think of different priorities that help that greater good, then that might open something up in your own experience at work, your own employee experience to be better, which ripples out.
Yeah. And I just want to share you the little phrase that this leader used with me in our last coaching session. She had this realization that she'd been putting experiences, as she called it, she'd been putting experiences in the backpack of reasons why I'm not good enough. And she said, I've been filling this backpack up for years of reasons why I'm not good enough. And she's now decided to change that habit. And she's now putting her experiences in the handbag of learning and self-discovery. And I just love that reframe. A lot of us do carry around the backpack of reasons why we're not good enough. But maybe if we were putting those experiences in the handbag of learning and self-discovery, it's a much more empowering and hopeful visualization of how we go about our work.
I love that. If this resonates with you, I highly recommend checking out the book, Force for Good, How to Thrive as a Purpose-Driven Leader. You can find this anywhere where books are sold, Amazon, online, or your even local bookshop down the corner. I've read it. It is a really practical, fantastic guide for senior leaders that are wanting to make a change in their own organization. You also have something called the Coaching Circle program. Can you tell us briefly what that is?
Yeah, the Coaching Circle is a community of purpose-driven coaches and consultants who want to get alongside purpose-driven leaders and use the tools and techniques and exercises in my books and in my work to help support those purpose-driven leaders in their roles. So we're looking to attract like-minded, values-driven coaches who want to stand for trust and purpose, and give them the resources to do that well, and support them with mentoring, with masterclasses, and build a community around that. Because again, sometimes it's a lonely role being in the purpose-driven space, whether you're a leader or whether you're a coach, and community helps us be brave. So yeah, if anybody is interested in exploring that coaching circle, then I'd be very interested to share more with them.
Yeah. So all of the resources we talked about today, you can find a link to the Coaching Circle program, links to the books, all of the good stuff is actually in our show notes. So if you go over to thesimplifiers.com, you'll find this episode and you'll be able to click through to all those links. In addition, you'll also be able to get contact directly to John through his LinkedIn and his website. So make sure to, again, go over to thesimplifiers.com. So as we wrap up, John, I have a few questions I'd like to ask you that I ask all of our guests to come on. And so here we go. First and foremost, what's one book or blog that you're reading these days that's either inspiring you or challenging you and poking holes into your belief system?
Yeah, well, I'm reading a book called A Course in Miracles Made Easy by a guy called Alan Cohen. And A Course in Miracles is a spiritual book that I have studied for many, many years. And the reason why I have to read this book about A Course in Miracles Made Easy is it's really, really hard. So I appreciate that Alan Cohen is making it a bit easier, because I've read that book many times. I've studied it. I think it's a massively powerful text, but there's always more to learn in it.
It's such a good book. Course in Miracles. I've never read the simplified version, but that's speaking right to my best interest. So we'll link that book up from Alan Cohen, again, to the show notes, thesimplifiers.com.
Right.
I believe gratitude and simplicity go hand in hand. Tell me, what are you grateful for today?
What am I grateful for today? Well, I'm grateful to be sharing now about a topic that I'm passionate about. I'm grateful to be healthy and not in pain. And I'm grateful that, yeah, I'm going to have a nice meal with my wife, Jane. So, yeah, thank you for reminding me of those simple pleasures. And yeah, it's really important.
It's beautiful. I appreciate that too. Thank you for sharing it. Tell me, who is one person in your network, somebody that you know personally, you just feel is up to brilliant things? If we could shine a spotlight on them, and who knows, maybe one day we'll have them on the podcast. Who would that be?
Yeah, there's a guy called James Vincent, Mary, who hosts a podcast called Business Excellence here in the UK. And I've been on that podcast, but I've also known James for several years. He leads an organization called Action Coach in the UK. And I just find James is someone who is very, very curious about learning, very, very curious about people and performance. And he can also make things simple. And I know that's very important to this podcast. So James Vincent is somebody that, yeah, I think you would find you'd have a great conversation with him.
It sounds amazing. Yeah, we'll link him in the show notes as well. If people are curious about him in the world, again, go to thesimplifiers.com. John, I am so grateful for your wisdom and your time today. And I feel like these are very practical things that you're sharing. So I really hope somebody somewhere who's listening to us gets inspired. My final question for you is this. Again, someone somewhere is listening to us right now, and they are a leader in a company that's going through massive transformation. And whenever anybody uses the word transformation, that usually means change management and big layoffs coming soon. What's one thing you could whisper into their ear just to encourage them in this moment as a leader?
Yeah. What I would whisper in their ear is everything will be all right in the end. So if it's not all right, it's not yet the end.
I love that. Dr. John Blakey, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Mary. Pleasure.